What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Canadian Football Fantasy Fix for the Division Finals of the 2021 CFL Playoffs. I'm Ryan Coop here with your wide receiver preview this time around, taking a look at all of the options at receiver for CFL Fantasy among the four teams playing this week, looking to take a shot to go to the Grey Cup the following week. Exciting times around the CFL and CFL Fantasy. If you missed it, go back, check out my quarterback and running back preview for the week as well. And stay tuned. Later today, I'll have your defensive preview out. Also, Saturday, I'll have depth chart updates for all four teams playing to help get you set to lock in the rest of your lineups at that point, and do any tinkering you need. So let's dive right in. Take a look at the options for the four teams. Let's go team by team here. Start off with the East Division Final. Start off with the division, first place team in the division, the Toronto Argonauts, the home team in this game. And here are the options for the Argos at receiver this week. I mean, there's a number of them that they've dressed all season long. These are the most likely ones, I would say, to get into the game for them. Eric Rogers is at the top of this list, and looks like he is trending to be ready to go for this game. He has not played in quite some time. Back in week number 7 was the last time we've seen Eric Rogers. He did put up 19.7 points in that game, but he's averaging 12.9 on the year, $7,674. You're looking, if you're trying to get my what I deem as full value, which is 2.5 points per $1,000, you're trying to get 19.2 out of Eric Rogers, and I'm saying it's a red light. Stay away from him this week, because I don't think he hits that total necessarily. I'm a little bit nervous on that. 19.7 in his last game. Game before that, 9.6. Game before that, 16. He had a couple games earlier in the year hovering around the 9 to 11 point mark, which has kind of been his sweet spot. You know, they got a lot of targets there in Toronto. Not only that, McLeod Bethel-Thompson has struggled down the stretch, and I think there is, potential to be really let down by paying one of the higher end prices for receivers for Eric Rogers this week. So I'm saying stay away from that option. Then we get into a couple potential plays here as yellow lights that I kind of like. Devaris Daniels of the Argos, $7,336 is his price. 18.3 is what you're looking for. He does just have a 9.9 point average on the season, which certainly at that price is not what you want to see. But in his past 3 games, he has put up 17.1, 19.4, and 11.4 in those 3 games. So it's trended up, down the stretch here in 2 weeks, close to, if not hitting his full value. He has a couple weeks this year, 3-4 games this year where he's hit 2.5 or 2 points per $1,000 or more. But then he also has had a couple of games where he's been kind of in my red zone on my charts here, which is even less than a point per $1,000 you spend. So Daniels, to me, book him in as a play that could be worth the reward, but is pretty high risk, I would say. And so if you're looking to take a chance and you feel good about the Argos this week, that could be a play, but you could also get burned. Josh Huff is a yellow light for me as well, just because I want to see another game from him in this Argos lineup. He was the leading receiver for them in the final week of the year when they rested most of their starters and put up a good 14.5 points in that game. Still a couple shy of the 17.7 you're hoping for. But he did show some good flashes earlier this year with Calgary as well. If he does continue to get the usage he did in that final week of the season into the playoffs here, I think that could be a good day for Huff. But I do need to be a bit skeptical on that because there was no Rogers, Daniels, Gittins Jr., Collins Jr., Worthy, any of those guys in that game. They're going to take the targets away, and I would expect Huff to kind of draw in at just a couple targets. So potential play perhaps. He's a good receiver, but I'm not sold on it given his state in the lineup. Curly Gittins Jr. is, I would say, the closest one here for me to a green light option for the Argos. $6,949, 17.4 points is what you're looking for. In his past 5 games, he's gone 17.5, 19.6, 9.4, 16.8, and 20.2. Spoiler alert for the rest of the receivers. He's probably as close as any of them R to being a green light for me this week. He, I think, is one of the top receiver options, but here's why I don't give him the green light. Eric Rogers coming back into the lineup makes me a little bit worried that, he's going to lose some of those touches, especially the ones near the end zone, because Eric Rogers is always the type of guy that puts up a lot of his fantasy points via touchdowns, and that's where Gittens Jr. has been shining in the last number of weeks. Yes, he's put up big catches and big yardage, but the touchdowns have certainly helped with a number of his weeks hitting the value. So slight concern there for me for him, and also tough matchup. We saw Hamilton's defense play really well last game. But I would say Gittens Jr. is I'm pretty confident in this pick. He is as close to a green light of a yellow light you will see. And then we get into the options. I don't like the rest of the board here for Toronto. Ricky Collins Jr., $6,339. Down the stretch of the season, last 3 games, 3.9, 10.4, and 3.6 for him. He did have 2 games there in the middle where he kind of put up 14, 15 points. And then before that, a number of games under a point per $1,000 there as well. So, kind of like Tavares Daniels, up and down all season. As of lately, it's been a little more down for him. So, I say stay away from Collins Jr. I think there are better plays available. Chandler Worthy did have, some bright spots a couple games there in the middle of the season, but in his past 4 games has put up under 10 points in all of them, so I don't like that play here either. Juwan Brescison hasn't really done much since getting back into the lineup for Toronto, just averaging 3.9 points on the season. Dejon Brissett, 1.4 point average on the year, not worth the cheap value play there. Same thing with Drez Anderson if he's in the lineup. He did have a good game of 12 points, but other than that, his highest total has been 4, so I don't think it's worth the play there. Moving on to the other side of the matchup, the Hamilton Tiger Cats may or may not have Braylon Addison back in the lineup. He wasn't quite ready to go last time out against Montreal in the Eastern semifinal, but he is the most expensive receiver on the slate here for Hamilton, $9,524. If he's not playing, I think it's a given that he's a red light. Of course, don't play a guy who's not going to be in your lineup. Even if he is playing, 23.8 points, don't think he's quite hitting that. I think Mazzoli spreads the ball around enough that that's not worth in your lineup, especially if this is a tight game. The Argos have done a very good job, especially last time out, of shutting down that Hamilton offense. So I'm a bit worried there, and I think the price is way too high. It's almost a third of your salary cap for the week. The rest of the potential starting receivers here are all kind of yellow lights for me for Hamilton. I think any of them could have a good day and be a good option. It's just hard to pick at times which guy that's going to necessarily be. Brandon Banks at $7,618 is the most expensive. He's also got the highest average out of them all on the year at 12.2. And he has picked up his game a little bit here down the stretch. 22.1, 14.5, 12.4, and 16.8 in his past 4 games. So only one of those has been worth the value, though. He's been picking it up. He's becoming more involved in that offense again and more of the go-to receiver we're used to seeing. But at his prices, he's still not quite hitting his full value mark. So that leaves that one as a yellow light to me. Tim White, much the same, has been one of the best receiver options for Hamilton this season. 17.9 points, what you want out of him. Last week put up just 9.4, which was a disappointment. But before that, 3 of his last 4 games, 14.5 or higher. So at least hitting you 2 points per $1,000. I like Tim White in the way they use him in the offense. I think he's got big play potential. They put the ball in his hands. They let him run with it. And I think he has some great plays there. His price has risen to a point where it's getting in the category of, can I afford this necessarily to take a chance on that? But I think it's still worth a potential play. Jalen Acklin this year has been kind of up and down. It's definitely had his highest ups with Mazzoli at the helm. In fact, down the stretch drive here for Jalen Acklin, he's hit full value twice. He's hit close to full value twice. He hit over 10 points last week in that playoff game, but he did have 2 games under 7. So hit and miss for Jalen Acklin. I do think he is one of the better options available among the Hamilton receivers, but it's hard to tell when they spread the ball around so much, of course. And then Stephen Dunbar Jr., he's been hit and miss. He was a lock in the lineup, after putting up 3 straight weeks of full value for him. He's the cheapest of the main starting receivers here. 13.2 points is what you need, and he's averaging 10.1. That's pretty close. That's just a couple points shy. But every time, it seems like he's gained the momentum, then he takes a bit of a step back here. I mentioned those 3 good weeks in a row. Well, 3 of his final 4 weeks of the season have been under 7 points. He did put up 13.9 2 games ago against Saskatchewan, but last week against Montreal, a big ol' 0. And you certainly don't want to take a 0 in your lineup. So risk versus reward there on Dunbar Jr., and his usage. I would expect a bit of a bounce back game. He's not going to put up a 0 against Toronto here again, or a 0 here like he did against Montreal last week, but does he hit his full value? Well, 3 of the last 4 weeks he has been a bit of a disappointment. Poppy White, we'll see what his usage in this lineup looks like. He was mainly a return man, also got involved a little bit in the run game, I think. I don't know if he got in for a catch or 2 against Montreal last week, but $27.51 is his price. You need 6.9 points out of him. Last week he put up 4.3. The week before that he got a little more involved in the game and put up a 7.8. There's not a lot of great cheap value plays among the 4 teams playing this week, I find. So if you are looking for one and he is listed on the roster and you desperately need to save some money, well, maybe Poppy White is a potential play available there for you. I don't think he will get a ton of offensive reps, though, so don't bank on a massive week necessarily out of him. And then 3 options, David Unger, Tyler Ternowski, Nikola Kalinic, none of them really producing strong enough values to be worth putting in your lineup this week. Then we get into the West Final. The Winnipeg Blue Bombers winning the West Division. They are at home here to the Saskatchewan Roughriders. Here's how I see the options for the Bombers. I think they have one of the they're probably the team with the best matchup this week. I think there is room for some big plays to be had against the Bombers. Against the Riders. Definitely not against the Bombers. You know how much I love that Winnipeg defense. Kenny Lawler is the most expensive one on the chart here for Winnipeg at $9,982. Much like Braylon Addison, good player. He was the leading receiver in the CFL this year. Put up over 1,000 yards. Could be a big impact guy and have a good week. But even when he does, I don't know if he hits 25 points. I think that's tough to hit for any receiver. Unless you're putting up, a 10-catch week or a multiple touchdown game. And I think it's really hard to bank on one guy getting 2 touchdowns. So I say stay away, spend your money, spread it around a little bit more than just hoping for a massive week out of Lawler. 15.6 point average on the season in his past, 5 games. He's put up, his highest total's been 18.1. He's also had a couple around 8 points. So should be good for a couple of catches and, decent yardage, potentially a touchdown in each game, but might not be worth the full value for the price. Couple of intriguing options, Nick Dembski and Rashid Bailey. Dembski's coming in at 7,334. 18.3 points is the goal for him. He's averaged 12.9 on the season. Earlier this year, I would have locked him in as I think one of the best receiver options right now, but he has taken a bit of a slide down the stretch. To be fair, it's kind of hard to, you got to take it with a grain of salt for the Bombers. The final 3 games of the year really didn't mean much for them after they had first place locked up. So they did rest some guys down the stretch there. His final 2 weeks certainly didn't look good, but they didn't for anybody in the Bombers receiving corps. So take those two games out of it. 3 of the last 4 before that, 19.3, 3.9, 12.5, and 14.9. He's had, a pretty decent floor of at least 10 or 11 points most weeks this season. Of course, you'd still need to get around 18 for it to be worth your money at his price, which he has hit around that mark a couple of times this year. Been at least close, if not hitting it, many times this season. So real good option, I think. I'm not locking it in because I have a hard time always with the Bombers offense of guessing who's going to be the main go-to receiver. Dembski, I think, is one of the better plays because he'll get involved in the rushing game a little bit, pick up some yardage there, then put the ball in his hands, let him make some moves in space, and get the big plays here to give you the yardage you need. Probably not a ton of receptions necessarily, but he makes a lot happen with the ones he gets. Rashid Bailey, a couple of $100 cheaper. You need 17.4 out of him. He's averaged 10.8 on the season. Bailey's had himself some pretty good games. Last 2 weeks of the season, again, really didn't matter a ton for the team. In the 4 or 5 games before that, he had one of 8.6, but then a string of games where they were at least 11 or higher. So, decent floor. He's had the potential for some big ones. 22.5 he put up 1 week. He's had a couple games around 15. I think he's a guy that'll come close to hitting value, but I don't expect him to necessarily crush it this week. Darvin Adams is a stay away. It's a red light for me. He does, in 2 of his last 3 games played, have 13 or more points, but if you slide the window back a little further, the 3 games before that stretch were all under 5 points for him. He's a guy that is kind of touchdown dependent, kind of big play dependent, and doesn't get involved enough in that offense to really bank on the play there. Makes me nervous to see potentially, him not even maybe get 1 or 2 catches and be a big disappointment at your receiver slot. Drew Wolodarski, I think, could be an interesting play as one of your cheaper options. Last 2 games for him, 3.1, 3.8. He has a lot of games this year that are kind of under the 5-point mark, but he does have a couple where he's put up over 10 or around the 10 mark. You don't need a ton of points out of him to have a good week necessarily. If he gets involved 3 catches, 4 catches, you could be getting close to the value there. I wouldn't consider it a strong play. I think there are some cheaper around the same price, and we're going to get to those shortly with the other side of this matchup. But there is a play there. If you are looking to start a Bombers receiver for your lineup and need to save some cash, Janarian Grant handles kick returns. 9.7 is what you want at his price around $4,000. He's averaged 5.8 on the season. Had the one big return against BC a couple of weeks ago, but other than that, he's been hovering around the 4 to 5 point range. I don't think is worth putting in your lineup at that price. I don't mind a return man if he's cheap, but around $4,000, I think there are better plays available unless you are one of the top, having huge success like a Devontae Dedmon does. But Grant certainly hasn't had that consistently this season. Then we get to the other side of the matchup, the Saskatchewan Roughriders. Here's how I see them this week. Well, it's always tough to pass against the Bombers' defense, which is no surprise then that I do have a number of red lights on this board. Duke Williams is by far the most expensive Riders receiver at $8,764. He's had quite the usage. He's been pretty involved for the Riders, especially the last couple of games. Had a big 28.6 week a couple of weeks ago. But his involvement, he seems like he's always getting involved, but 4 of his 5 games so far have been 10.5 points or less. He's also, been injured a little bit in practice this week, so it remains to be seen, will he even be in the lineup? Plus, he's facing that tough Bomber defense. I don't like the play of Duke Williams this week. I think there are better top-end receivers to spend your money on. Shaq Evans his role in this offense has kind of disappeared since he came back from injury. His highest total being 11.1. Last week against Calgary, I think he had 4 catches for -4 yards. Or no, 1 catch for -4 yards or something like that was his total on the week. He just didn't get involved enough in the offense. They're trying to force the ball to him in situations where it's not landing. He's not getting the catches in. He's not getting the yardage in to be worth putting in your lineup, even at a $5,000 salary. I think Keon Schaefer-Baker, who's a $500 cheaper, is a better potential play because he has been delivering in the lineup. 3 of his last 4 games, he's put up 10.8 or higher. So 2 games he hit full value. 1 game last week he hit pretty close to that and was the leading receiver for the Riders. We saw him have a big game earlier this year. I think it was against the Bombers, 14.3 points in one of those. He's had some very good games this season, and I think if you're going to take a Riders receiver against this Bombers defense, is probably the one you should take. Braden Lenius is a red light for me. While he has had some success this year and a decent average, 3 games in a row now he has not gotten involved. 2.5, 4.9, and 1.3 in his last 3 games. Not loving the play of Braden Lenius. I don't think it's one that's going to break you a big game this week, especially against Winnipeg. Mitchell Picton, Justin McInnis, Jake Hardy. I'll talk about those guys all at once. None of them really get involved enough in the offense in the regular rotation to be worth putting in your lineup. The only potential play I'm considering here is Paul McRoberts Jr. if you are looking for a cheap $2,500 to fill out your roster. 5.8 point average against Calgary, or 5.8 points against Calgary last week. He played 1 game earlier this year and put up 9.1 in that one as well. If you're going to spend money in this matchup for the Riders at receiver, maybe you spend low on McRoberts. Even if he does get shut down, you're not missing out on a ton of points for your full value week here. I think it's a low risk, high reward potential play. If they do break a big game, there is one of the best cheap value plays in my opinion. So that's how I see the receivers this week for the division finals. Much like some of the other positions we've already talked about in videos earlier this week, no options that are an absolute lock for me, unfortunately. I think there are some good plays from each team really having a couple potential plays here at receiver, but none that I think are above and beyond worth the full value more than anybody else. So I apologize, there's no green lights there to give you the surefire picks, but I hope in going through all these options, I've made the wheels turn a little bit in your head to help you and maybe confirm some things you're thinking already to help you lean one direction, or maybe help steer you away from a potential risky play. That's all the goal here, is to help you make the best decisions you can. If you missed it, check out the quarterback and running back previews I've already put out. Stay tuned for the defensive preview yet as well. And on Saturday, I'll have your depth chart updates to help you finish locking in your lineups. Do all the YouTube things, like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you liked, what you didn't. If you have any fantasy questions, put them in the comments section or tweet them at me at CooperTrooper42. Link to that's in the description. And if you want to play CFL Fantasy alongside myself and other viewers, there's still 2 weeks left to go in the playoffs. You can still get in at any time and join the fun. A link to that's in the description as well. You can join the Canadian Football Fantasy Fix group over on the official CFL Fantasy site. Play alongside myself and other viewers this week and the rest of the playoffs. As always, thanks for watching. Take care. Have a good one. Bye.